The Joe Rogan Experience.
Because if they continue to do things like Chaz, the 6 block place in Seattle, I mean, that seemed like almost a little bit of a test, a little bit of a test run.
Yes.
I mean, they did a Mad Max style takeover of 6 blocks in Seattle and held it for a considerable amount of time with the compliance of the mayor, who called it the Summer of Love. Like,
I know.
What
I saw a video of what happened after Chaz, and there were like sort of zombie-like people lying around on the grass. Everything seemed to be covered in urine, and there weren't any statues. Obviously, there were a hell of a lot of plinths, and everything had graffiti over it. And I thought, people should realize this is what you inherit. You'll inherit rubble.
Yes.
You'll inherit piss-stained rubble. And I'm not sure how many people have got that lesson yet.
Well, they should read your book. The Madness of Crowds is excellent. It really is. It's a very good book. And, you know, you wrote that book before the shit really hit the fan. But it was eerily accurate in many ways. When you were talking about the current problems and where they could lead. And there's so much of what you were saying in that book that could be used as like a guide to what's happening today.
Yeah. That's what I hoped. I mean, I did it a year ago. I've updated it now. And
what did you update?
Well, basically, because now it's out this month, is that basically I thought something very interesting happened through the COVID era, which was that at the beginning of it, I thought, like we all thought, okay, this is a plague like the Justinian plague. It's going to end the empire. You know, we're all going to lose massive numbers of our loved ones. And if that's the case, at least at these end times, the social justice warriors will pipe down. You know, it was my one consolation was I thought at least we won't have to deal with them so much, because if everyone's got real problems, if everyone's got real complaints, kind of microaggressions start to seem less important than they have done in recent years. So that was my assumption at the beginning, was if the plague was what it seemed at first, then we'd hear less from these people. And then my impression was that as COVID went on, something very interesting happened, which was that our tolerance for the social justice activists diminished. I mean, there were little things like little bits of light, like Sam Smith, you know, from his mansion, posts a photo of him sort of crying a bit and sort of sad because he's lonely. And normally that would be, oh, Sam Smith, they is feeling bad and so on. And there was just total we don't care. We don't care.
Who is Sam Smith?
Sam Smith is a British. I'm so pleased you don't know of him. It fills me with joy. He's got a horrible, whiny voice. He sang one of the worst Bond theme songs against some really stiff competition, as you know. And it was one that nobody had. Anyhow, Sam Smith was the guy who came out as gay, then as genderqueer, and then as non-binary, or look at me.
Or look at me.
It's coming out as look at me.
That's what it should be called. It should be called coming out as look at me. Yeah. What the fuck is non-binary? My God.
So then he came out as look at me, and then a bit later he wanted more attention. He posted a photo of himself in his mansion saying, you know, how difficult he was finding COVID, and there was a complete lack of empathy.
Oh my God.
And I sort of thought things like that were a good sign, you know, because that's it. You know, if at best we're all going to see a massive decline in our living standards and our whole societies have got mass unemployment and so on, then I thought, well, at least we'll hear a bit less from those guys. And then several things happened. The first was that some people started doing things along the following line. As you know, in Madness of Crowds, I do each of these in turn. I do gay, women, that is relations between the sexes, race and trans. And I noticed that the women thing came in first, that people started saying things like, women are suffering most from COVID. And I thought, well, okay, we've got to look at the stats on this. And then the stats came in and it showed that men were disproportionately likely to die. And then the same people said, well, the men might be doing the dying, but the women are doing the suffering or something. And that didn't make very much sense, but it showed that there were some people who needed to look at this through the prism they've looked through everything, which is women, men, disproportionate relations between the sexes. And then you got some people doing that with gay. The BBC in my own country, in Britain, started running pieces about, you know, it's difficult for a lot of LGBT people because they're living with their families who might be homophobic. And again, you sort of read these stories and you thought, well, yeah, a lot of people are living with their families who are their families. I mean, they're having to live with their mum and dad, and they might be heterosexual, and they've just been forced into chastity by government regulations. You know what I mean? It's difficult for everyone.
Yes.
Why do we need to single that out? Then there was a story about somebody who, I kid you not, by the way, Joe, you'll love this one. The BBC had a story which was of a trans person who said, I'm sorry, the headline was, I'm fearful that I'm going to be buried in the wrong gender.
Oh, boy.
And, of course, I just thought, well, a lot of us are just fearful of being buried, period.
Yeah, please call me a woman when I'm dead. I don't give a fuck.
You can misgender me all you like. I don't want to be buried. That's the first thing.
Not so crazy.
Not this year.
Ugh.
Not this year.
There's so much nonsense.
So that sort of thing started happening. I thought, oh, this is but again, I still thought they'll double down, but the majority won't listen to them. And then Minnesota happened, and the race one came back with a vengeance. And that had been happening through COVID, obviously, because in all of our countries, we had this thing of ethnic minorities, particularly black people, suffering disproportionately from the virus. And what I was worried about was that in the American media and the British media and elsewhere, this was being portrayed as if if this was the case, and it does seem to be, then it was because America couldn't even import a virus from China without giving it its own special racist spin. All of the things that you could look at to explain why there might be a higher mortality rate, including higher numbers of perhaps nurses in the health service, underlying health issues, and much more. That wasn't being focused on. It kept on being portrayed as if this could only be because of racism. Mm. And that just worried me, because I thought even a virus, a pandemic, can't bring us together. And we still have these people doing this. But as I say, it wasn't until after Minnesota that really took off, and we discovered something very important, which is that racism and the whole issue of race is even more important than trying to avoid the pandemic, and that and everything that's flowed from it is just rolling on, and it's very, very worrying. It's everything I feared would happen, which was everybody doubling down on these identity traits in the era when we all hoped we could move beyond them.
We also got to this weird point where we're supposed to collectively ignore the fact that having 50,000 people marching through the streets arm in arm could easily be spreading the disease. And there was this giant uptick of the disease in America, and everyone stuffed their head in the sand and pretended they were not connected. Everyone wanted to pretend. Well, it had nothing to do with the protests. Well, if you
even more,
it's clear.
Even more. It wasn't just head in the sand. It was actually saying, yes, we don't mind. I mean, the medical professionals in America who signed a joint letter defending people going out on the protests were saying that racism kills, and so does COVID, but racism is clearly a bigger underlying risk than COVID. And if you've taken that view, then everything's possible, isn't it? Yeah. I mean, apart from the fact that it's clearly not true, because however you would, work out the numbers of people killed by racism, which does exist, but I mean, to claim that the mortality rates from racism are higher than those from COVID, what are the figures in America now? 6 figures of people who've died.
190,000 is the
190,000, it's surely the people who claimed that racism kills more people than COVID should have to answer and say, where are the 190,000 racist murders in America this year? And that doesn't happen. And that's medical professionals saying that.
Well, you've got everyone terrified of being labeled as a racist. That's where we've gotten to this point, how we've gotten to this point.
Yeah. Well, we live in an era where all of the worst things you can be accused of are also not provable and not disprovable. Yeah. And that's something I say in The Madness of Crowds, which is just very difficult for us. It happens every day to someone. as you know. I mean, someone gets called the whole charge sheet, they're homophobe, transphobe, misogynist, racist. And first of all, obviously people can level that without any evidence, and often knowing that it's not true. But the problem is the person who it's said to has no defense, because you cannot actually prove you're not a racist. You can't prove you're not a misogynist. You can't prove you're not a homophobe. It happens all the time. People say, I'm not a homophobe. It happened with the former Australian Prime Minister the other day. I'm not a homophobe. My sister-in-law is a lesbian and she married her partner and I was at the wedding. But they still say he's a homophobe. You can't prove that the claim isn't true. And the worst of that is obviously with racism. And so obviously everybody in the era is trying desperately to avoid the claim. Because once the claim is made, our society has no way to brush it off.
Episodes of the Joe Rogan Experience are now free on Spotify. That's right, they're free. From September 1st to December 1st, they're going to be available everywhere. But after December 1st, they will only be available on Spotify, but they will be free. That includes the video. The video will also be there. It'll also be free. That's all we're asking. Just go download Spotify. Much love. Bye-bye.